Also, let's move this conversation to Abuja, the country's political capital. Lunge Egwerekide is the president of pension operators. Of course, the pension industry is also very key in the entire market conversation. But of course, we have a bit of development there regarding what's the state of the paramilitary agencies, their pensions within the Nigeria's pension emerging market since 2004. Lunge is live to us from Abuja studios. Let's bring him into the conversation right now and hear from him. Lunge, it's good to see you again. Thanks for coming through.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yes, we thank you for your time. Give us a brief overview of the pension market as this currently stratified from private sector to public sector.
Well, the pension market, the public sector has been outstripped by the private sector. I think the public sector now has a contribution value, a fund under management value of about 43%, while the private sector has a value of 57%. So the private sector is much stronger now than the public sector, but nevertheless, if you look at those percentages, the public sector counts very significantly.
Well, yes. The public sector is where we want to focus on a little bit this conversation with you. When we say the public sector, what and what, who and who is within this public sector space?
The public sector has the federal government civil servants, has the state civil servants, and also has local government civil servants. That's what the public sector and parastatals of all of those tiers of government. That's what the public sector is comprised of.
Now, where is the paramilitary folks in this arrangement?
Well, the paramilitary, even though they muscle us every day on the streets, are part of the civil service. So they are very much a part of the federal public sector. And I think that it is important that we realize that even the military is part of the civil service. And realize that in the crafting of the pension law, it was carefully thought out that we provide for each worker in this country in a way that it becomes sustainable. So I think that's where the conversation begins to steer to.
Before PENCOM was established around 2004, we've had various segments of pensions, retirement funds existing in the country, isn't it? Including the paramilitary. They've always managed their pensions, don't they?
Well, I think, you see, we have been on this trail for quite a while. The pension system has evolved, and it has become a lot more sustainable with the contributory pension scheme. Previous to now, there was a defined benefit arrangement, and the defined benefit arrangement for purposes of creating awareness and description was such that the beneficiary of pension gets paid a certain amount in pension after they retire, not based on any contribution they've made, but based on a retirement salary, a retirement amount. And it is a promise that the employer gives to the worker at the time they retire. Now, the critical question is, how is this benefit funded? The problem with the Nigerian system in the past, and with most defined benefit systems, is that they are pay-as-you-go systems. And what pay-as-you-go means is that when the certain crop of people retire, that's when payment is made to them. There is no money accumulated, so they're not funded. And in the Nigerian case, it was a chronic situation of unfunding. And so just before 2004, the Obasanjo regime found out that there was a huge pension liability. And that's what gave rise to the Pension Reform Act 2004. The Pension Reform Act introduced a contributory pension scheme, which made for workers contributing a part and their employers contributing a part. And it cut across the federal public sector and private workers. In 2014, the state governments have been included mandatorily, as well as the local governments. Now, what this does for you is that you know that at a very minimum, what you're contributing from your salary would be in an account that is personal to you and will be available to you when you retire. The employer is also supposed to contribute a certain amount. Today, it is 8% from the employee and 10% from the employer. I say that the increase that happened from the 2004 law to the 2014 law was it used to be 7.5 on each side. It's now 18%, 10% from the employer, 8% from the employee. The public sector has found it somewhat of a challenge increasing their contribution from 7.5 to 10%. Now, what we're hearing from the National Assembly is that some of these public servants who are put in the segment of the paramilitary, the sponsor of a certain bill on the National Assembly wants that these people stop contributing completely and they revert to a defined benefit system. Now, the government finds it a challenge meeting up the increase from 7.5% to 10%. And these sponsors of the bill now want to increase the financial burden on government and say nobody contributes anymore. We will pay you a certain amount when you retire, which is not based on what has been set aside for you. It's going to be based on a percentage of your retirement salary. So I think that it is completely unrealistic. We will begin to see long queues of people who are lining up to be authenticated for whether they are alive or dead, whether they're the rightful people to get pensions. And then we're going to also see that there will be delays in payment because it is going to be strictly on the budget of government. And I know that in your program you've been speaking today about how government will be funded. Government is struggling, and you don't want to put an additional burden on government to pay what it cannot afford. You know, so these are the critical questions that we need to look at. It's not an altruistic bill, and I would like to say that whatever it is that needs to be resolved in the contributory pension scheme can be resolved within the 2014 law, because there is a provision to increase the rates that can be paid if government so chooses to enhance the compensation of the paramilitary. That is included in the law.